On a cold afternoon, the sunlight fought through the holes in the old rusted roof, spilling weak beams of light onto the cracked ground beneath. The air smelled of decay, and the silence felt suffocating. At the center of this dilapidated building lay a dog, Rex, a once proud German shepherd, now reduced to a mere shadow of his former self. His fur, once sleek and strong, was matted and patchy, with scars marking his body like remnants of his tragic past. The chains that bound him were rusted and dug painfully into his neck, restricting any movement he might have had left. His body was weak, trembling as he lay in a pool of dust and dirt. It seemed as if the world had forgotten him. His once commanding presence had faded into nothingness, replaced with an exhausted body struggling to survive. But beneath all the pain and weariness, something in Rex's eyes still burned, a flicker of recognition, of memory. He remembered Captain Sarah Miller, his handler, the one person who had always been there for him. Her voice had once been his anchor in the chaos of war, guiding him through countless battles, both on the field and in the depth of his own heart. She had been more than just a commander. She had been his family. Then, one fateful day, Sarah had vanished. The horrors of war had torn them apart, and Rex had been left alone, lost in the world. But even in the darkest moments, when hope seemed impossible, Rex never forgot her. He had waited for her, hoping that one day she would come back. Just as Rex closed his eyes, exhausted from the battle within his own body, a sound broke the silence, a sound he had not heard in years. Footsteps. The rhythm of the footsteps was unmistakable, familiar. A sense of hope surged through Rex's veins, and his ears perked up, despite his body's protest. The door creaked open, and a figure stood silhouetted in the light. Rex's heart raced. Could it really be her? It was Sarah. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she dropped to her knees beside Rex. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. This broken creature before her, lying in the dust, was the same loyal dog she had once trusted with her life. She could see the scars, the pain, but in those deep brown eyes she saw recognition, a glimmer of the dog she had loved. Rex, it's really you, Sarah whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Rex didn't bark or wag his tail. He didn't have the strength for that anymore. But in his eyes, Sarah could see the glimmer of hope, the quiet plea for help. She reached out and gently stroked his fur. A silent promise formed in her heart. She would not leave him again. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, her eyes scanning the weak figure lying before her. Her breath caught in her throat as the realization sank in. It was Rex, the same German shepherd who had once fought by her side in the harshest corners of the world, the dog who had saved her life more times than she could count. But now he was a shadow of his former self. His body was frail, his fur a tangled mess of scars and patches. His once proud posture had collapsed into the broken shape of a victim, a creature who had endured too much for too long. Her hands trembled as she slowly approached him, her heart aching with every step. Rex, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. It's really you. The sound of her voice seemed to pierce through the haze of exhaustion that surrounded Rex. His tired eyes, half closed and filled with exhaustion, flickered toward her. For a moment, they locked, his deep brown eyes meeting her green ones. There was no bark, no tail wagging in excitement. There was no joyful greeting, no exuberant energy. Instead, there was only a quiet recognition, an understanding that somehow, despite everything, she had come back. Rex's body trembled slightly as he tried to lift his head, but the effort was too much. He collapsed back onto the cold, hard ground, his breath shallow and labored. His ribs were visible beneath his matted fur, evidence of the neglect and abuse he had suffered. Sarah's heart shattered. She had hoped to find Rex, to bring him back, but this sight was worse than she could have ever imagined. Her thoughts raced as she dropped to her knees beside him, gently placing her hand on his head. "I'm here now, Rex. I'm not going anywhere." Tears welled in her eyes as she stroked his fur, feeling the warmth of his body despite his weakened state. She could hardly believe that the strong, resilient dog she had once known had been reduced to this. But in that moment, she knew she had to act. She couldn't leave him here. No matter how much he had suffered, she would do whatever it took to bring him back. Without hesitation, Sarah wrapped a blanket around Rex's frail body, cradling him in her arms with the care of someone holding their most precious possession. He didn't resist, not even a little. His body was too weak to protest, but the trust in his eyes spoke volumes. Carefully, she carried him out of the crumbling building, her heart heavy with the weight of the years they had lost. As she placed him gently in the back of her car, she whispered, "I'll take care of you now, Rex, I promise." The drive to the vet was a blur, her mind consumed with worries about what had happened to him. How had he ended up in such a state? What horrors had he faced after their separation? But no matter the answers, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let him face anything alone again. As the car sped toward the clinic, Rex's head rested against her lap. His eyes were closed now, but Sarah kept stroking his fur, offering him the comfort of her presence, the promise that he would never be alone again. At the vet clinic, the fluorescent lights flickered above, casting an artificial glow on the sterile surroundings. The air smelled of antiseptic, a stark contrast to the warm, comforting environment that Sarah had once imagined for Rex. As they walked into the examination room, Sarah's hands trembled. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her eyes never leaving Rex, who lay motionless on the examination table. The vet, Dr. Stevens, was a calm, middle-aged woman with kind eyes. She immediately began assessing Rex's condition, gently prodding his limbs and checking his vital signs. Sarah stood by his side, rubbing his ear, trying to offer any small comfort she could. She could feel the tremors in Rex's body, as though every part of him was fighting to hold on, yet he remained so still. Dr. Stevens finally spoke, her voice soft but grave. "Rex is malnourished, severely so. His ribs are visible, and there are deep scars all over his body. His legs have old fractures that never healed properly, likely from when he was kept in that hellhole. But his spirit, it's still strong. That's the only thing keeping him alive at this point." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she gazed at her loyal companion. She had known Rex was in bad shape, but hearing it from the vet made it all the more real. The war had stolen so much from him, his strength, his vitality, and the happiness he had once known. But the one thing it hadn't taken was his will to live, and for that, Sarah was grateful. "He's a fighter," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. For the next few days, Sarah stayed by Rex's side, never leaving him for more than a few minutes. She fed him small meals, carefully monitoring his reactions. At first, Rex didn't have the energy to eat much, but gradually, he began to nibble on the food. Every little victory, no matter how small, felt like a triumph. He didn't wag his tail, but his eyes, those deep brown eyes, softened a little with every passing day. As Rex's body healed, Sarah could see his personality begin to emerge once again. He would raise his head slightly when she walked into the room, and once in a while, a tiny, hesitant thump of his tail would break the silence. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Sarah to believe that maybe, just maybe, the old Rex was still inside him. At night, however, the shadows of his past crept in. He would whimper softly in his sleep, his body twitching as if haunted by nightmares. Sarah would gently stroke his fur, whispering soothing words to him, trying to calm the storm in his dreams. But even in his troubled sleep, Rex never pulled away from her touch. He trusted her, and that trust gave Sarah the strength to push through her own emotions, knowing that together they would heal. One evening, as Sarah was sitting beside Rex, reading a book to pass the time, her phone buzzed, breaking the quiet peace that had settled in the room. She glanced at the screen. Major Daniels. The name sent a shiver down her spine. Daniels was an old friend from her days in the military, someone she trusted completely. But the tone of his calls was always serious, and tonight was no exception. "Sarah," Daniels began, his voice tight with concern, "I need to talk to you about Rex." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice filled with unease. Daniels paused before continuing. "Rex wasn't just lost, he was taken. There's a whole black market ring stealing military dogs, retraining them for illegal purposes, fighting, drug smuggling, anything they can exploit them for. Rex wasn't just abandoned, he was sold." A cold shiver ran through Sarah's body. She turned to look at Rex, who was lying on his bed, his eyes half closed, but still alert. The thought of her loyal companion being part of something so vile made her stomach churn. She had always known Rex had been through hell, but to hear this, it shattered her. "Who's behind this?" Sarah asked, her voice low with fury. Daniels hesitated for a moment before responding. "Colonel Vance. He's been running the operation for years. If he finds out Rex is still alive, he'll stop at nothing to take him back." Sarah's grip on the phone tightened. She could hear the urgency in Daniel's voice, the weight of the situation pressing down on both of them. Rex was more than just a dog to Sarah. He was a part of her family, and she would not let him fall into the hands of monsters like Vance. "I won't let him take Rex," Sarah said firmly, her voice resolute. "I'll protect him with everything I have." "You have to be careful, Sarah. Vance is dangerous," Daniels warned, but Sarah had already made up her mind. After hanging up, Sarah felt a cold rush of fear and determination flood through her. She looked at Rex, her loyal companion, and whispered, "I won't let them hurt you again, Rex. I promise." For the first time in a long while, Rex lifted his head, his eyes meeting Sarah's. He seemed to understand. He didn't bark, but the silent trust in his gaze was enough. They were in this together. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. Rex's recovery was slow but steady. As the days passed, he became more active, his strength returning bit by bit. Sarah had been so focused on his physical healing that she hadn't noticed the small changes that were happening around them, until one day it was undeniable. Rex was playing again. It started when Sarah's young neighbor, Lily, came over with a tennis ball. She had heard about Rex's recovery and wanted to meet the brave dog who had been through so much. At first, Rex had been hesitant, eyeing the small girl with caution. But Lily's innocence, her kind smile, and gentle nature won him over. With a slow, cautious movement, Rex raised his head and then took a tentative step forward. Lily laughed and tossed the tennis ball across the yard. To Sarah's surprise, Rex followed it, his long legs moving with more agility than she had seen in months. For a moment, it felt like the war had never happened, like Rex was the dog she had known before all the pain and suffering. Lily cheered as Rex brought the ball back to her, dropping it at her feet. The joy in her voice was infectious, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah allowed herself to smile. Rex was healing, not just physically, but emotionally as well. But as the days went by, the lingering fear of Colonel Vance's threat never fully left Sarah's mind. One evening, as she was finishing up dinner, a feeling of unease settled over her. It was too quiet. Rex had been pacing restlessly all evening, his ears flicking at every sound. And then, out of nowhere, he began growling low in his throat. Sarah froze, looking toward the window. It was dark outside, the moon casting an eerie glow over the street. The sound of a distant engine rumbled through the quiet night air. A black SUV. It was idling at the end of the street, its headlights off, blending into the shadows. "They found us," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with fear. Rex stood beside her, his body tense, muscles coiled in preparation for whatever danger lay ahead. The old war instincts were still there, burning fiercely in him. His stance was protective, his eyes narrowed, focused on the SUV in the distance. With a fierce growl, Rex moved toward the door, and Sarah followed. This was no longer just about Rex's recovery. This was about survival, and Rex was ready to fight. Rex's instincts had been sharp, but Sarah hadn't expected the suddenness of what was coming. The night had fallen quietly, and Sarah was making her way to the kitchen when she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside. Rex's head shot up, his eyes wide and alert, his ears pinned back. Suddenly, the door was kicked in, and two men in dark clothing stormed into the house. Rex was immediately on his feet, his body tense and low to the ground. He growled deeply, warning them to stay back. But the men didn't listen. "Get the dog," one of them shouted, and that was all it took. Rex lunged forward, teeth bared, his protective instincts taking over. Sarah screamed, rushing forward, but it was too late. One of the men aimed a taser at Rex, hitting him in the side. The dog yelped, falling to the ground. Sarah's heart stopped as she rushed to Rex's side. The men tried to move in, but Rex wasn't done. With a sudden surge of energy, he snapped at one of their legs, drawing blood. The men scrambled, backing away, knowing they couldn't overpower Rex in his fury. Sarah's hands shook as she helped Rex to his feet, her heart racing. "We need to get out of here," she whispered. She could feel the danger closing in. Rex whimpered, his side still twitching from the shock. But even as he stumbled, he stayed loyal, never leaving Sarah's side. She knew they couldn't stay another night in that house. The next morning, Sarah and Rex were on the move. They couldn't risk staying in the same place any longer. Rex's body still ached from the shock, but he was determined to stay strong. Sarah packed what she could carry, knowing they would need to stay hidden. They drove through back roads, stopping only when absolutely necessary. Every time they passed a car, Sarah's heart raced, fearing that someone from Vance's operation might be tailing them. Rex remained silent, but his body was stiff, ever watchful. As they reached a remote cabin in the woods, Sarah felt a slight sense of relief. The cabin was secluded, tucked away from the world, and hopefully far enough from the city that they wouldn't be found easily. Rex seemed to sense the change in environment too, his posture relaxing as they approached the small wooden structure. "Let's rest for a while, buddy," Sarah whispered, opening the door. Inside, The cabin was small but warm, and she quickly set up a small area for Rex to lie down. Despite the trauma he had endured, Rex's loyalty never wavered. He lay down beside Sarah's feet, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, ready to protect her if needed. The days in the cabin were calm, but Sarah's unease never left her. Rex had slowly begun to heal from his injuries, but he was still wary of every sound. His eyes flicked to the door at the slightest noise, his body tensing every time a bird chirped or a branch cracked in the distance. It wasn't long before Sarah realized they weren't as safe as she had hoped. One afternoon, while Rex slept by the fire, she heard a knock on the door. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen anyone for days, but something in the pit of her stomach told her this wasn't a good sign. When Sarah cautiously opened the door, a familiar face appeared, Major Daniels, but his expression was far more serious than usual. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Vance has escalated his search. He's sending out more men, and they're getting closer. You're not safe here." Sarah's blood ran cold. The nightmare she had been trying to escape was catching up with her. But Rex was already at her side, his low growl signaling that he sensed the same danger. His loyalty to her was unwavering, and in that moment, Sarah knew that they would face whatever came next together. Cold wind brushed against the windows of the remote cabin hidden deep in the woods. Inside, Sarah loaded her last magazine, her hands steady, but her heart racing. Rex, a now fully recovered German Shepherd, sat at her feet, his sharp amber eyes focused, his ears perked. Scout, younger and full of energy, mimicked his mentor, unaware of the storm about to arrive. Major Daniels had warned her just hours ago. "Colonel Vance is coming himself. He wants Rex, alive or not." Sarah looked at Rex. "This is it, boy. One last mission." Suddenly, headlights pierced the darkness. 2 black SUVs screeched to a stop. Armed men in tactical gear spread out, surrounding the cabin, but Sarah and Rex were ready. With a single whistle, Rex leaped into action. Smoke bombs burst across the lawn. Scout barked to distract the men, while Rex darted through the fog, launching at the attackers with trained precision. Sarah moved like the soldier she once was, taking cover and firing only when necessary. For a few tense minutes, it was chaos. Then silence. Only one figure remained, Colonel Vance. "You should have handed him over," Vance growled, gun aimed. "He's just a dog." "No," Sarah said, stepping between him and Rex. "He's family." A sudden growl. From behind, Rex lunged, knocking the gun from Vance's hand. Police sirens howled in the distance. Major Daniels had arrived with backup. It was over. Weeks later, Rex lay on the porch, the summer sun warming his old bones. His muzzle had gone gray, and his movements were slower, but his eyes still shone with pride. Sarah sat beside him, stroking his fur. Scout trotted nearby, now stronger, smarter, trained by the best. Sarah smiled, holding up the newspaper. "Colonel Vance convicted. Military dogs get legal protection." At the bottom, a picture of Rex wearing a medal. That night, Rex didn't wake up. He passed away peacefully, beside the one person who had always believed in him. A large crowd gathered under the soft morning sky. Soldiers, children, and rescued dogs stood around a polished stone monument. On it, engraved in gold, "Rex, the heart that led us home." Sarah stood with Scout, now wearing Rex's old collar. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she smiled. Rex's mission had ended, but his legacy had just begun. And as Scout stepped forward, proud and calm, it was clear. Rex had passed on his courage, and the world would never forget him. If Rex's story moved your heart, share it forward. For every hero forgotten, let one voice rise. For every dog like Rex, let there always be a home.